So let's talk about, guys, type 2 diabetes and your nutrition, okay? Now, guys, most of the time when people say type 2 diabetes and nutrition, one of the first things that we're always going to say is, oh, you got to get off the sugar. You got to get off the sugar. You got to get off the sugar. And yes, there's some truth to that, but there's also a lot of other things that can contribute to blood sugar, like mental stress. A cortisol response can 100% contribute to this as well, to insulin resistance. But a lot of times we're just running to, you got to be able to get off of the sugar, okay? There's other factors that are at play with this. So this is what I actually call the hierarchy of nutrition. And this is actually will be true whether you have type 2 diabetes or not. The first thing that I will always say is that non-inflammatory, having a non-inflammatory diet is always going to be best. We're talking about food allergies. We're talking about things that aren't going to inflame the liver. We're going to talk about things just in general, whether you have an allergy, just aren't necessarily good for you because of what they do to the body. So non-inflammatory is always going to be the most. Number two is then going to be foods that are influencing your insulin levels. And then the third thing is that you got to focus on getting the right kind of micronutrients, okay? By micronutrients, we're talking about things like vitamins, things like minerals and microminerals, and things like electrolytes and things like that. And then you should start focusing on your macronutrients, like as far as how many carbs and proteins and fats you should be getting. And then really, guys, the last thing to do, the last thing that you're going to need is you are going to need a supplement. But it really should be the last thing. And this is what we tell people. Is that we say, hey, I really prefer you to get this from food, but if you're going to refuse to eat liver, then we're going to give you a desiccated liver. Sometimes we're giving people a lot of supplements just to help them dig themselves out of a hole, but the whole idea is that you shouldn't have to be on these for the rest of your life. In fact, I told a young woman today having some issues, and I said, hey, you know what? She said, this seems like a lot of supplements. I said, yeah, but your labs actually show that you are extremely vitamin D deficient. Your labs actually do show that you are low in white blood cells. Your labs do show that you're low in lymphocytes. So we better feed those pathways while you start digging yourself out of the hole, or you're going to have a really bad day. So this is what I would say is the hierarchy of nutrition. Non-inflammatory, then focusing on insulin, then micronutrients, macronutrients, and then at the very last really should be the supplements. Now, do I take supplements? Absolutely, I do, because I know that my nutrition is not perfect. In fact, sometimes I will never ever get enough micronutrients just because I exercise, and so I do need to take a lot of things like magnesium, potassium. I heavily salt everything, and so there are some things that I'm missing. And not only that, I will take some things to help with DNA repair and methylation and things like that. So yeah, I do some things. Also because there's a difference between health and then actually performance. So yeah, there are certain things that are going to help you live to 90, but there's also some things that will help you perform better and help you feel better and help you do better things at the gym. So yeah, there are certain things that I will take. So that's what we would call the hierarchy of nutrition. But this is what most people's nutrition, guys, look like, okay? So it's first supplements, then it's the macronutrients, or their calories in and calories out. Then it's their focus on micronutrients, and then they're just barely glazing over insulin, and then they have no idea what a non-inflammatory diet is. So typically the standard American has this whole idea behind health and nutrition and even type 2 diabetes completely flipped upside down. So I had a woman, today, she's been suffering terribly. Autoimmunity that's going on, hasn't had really a solid normal bowel movement in about 12 years. Yet she was taking 12 different supplements, 12 different ones. She's like, well, which one should I be taking now? And I'm like, get off all of them because none of them are working right now. But I understand the idea behind certain supplements. But guys, one of the things that will always trump all of your supplements is if you are eating inflammatory, if you're eating things that are inflaming the body, okay? So let's talk about about non-inflammatory first and foremost. Well, what do we mean by non-inflammatory? So one of the things we mean about non-inflammatory is things that are not going to elicit an inflammatory response in your body or by your immune system, okay? Guys, this is why we test food allergies. We don't just test food allergies just because someone is having bloating or someone's having reflux or someone's having some gastrointestinal issues. We will always test food allergies because what we're trying to do is we're trying to limit inflammation in the body. Remember, nothing is going to recover if you are always inflamed. Just think about it. If you have a scab on your knee and you keep falling down on that scab every single day, I don't care how much colloidal silver, I don't care how much ointment you're going to rub on it. I don't care about how much collagen you're taking, because the first thing you have to do is please stop skinning your knee. You'll skin it every single day and it will never heal for a whole entire year. In fact, it'll probably get really infected and even worse. So this is why no matter if it's your hormones, no matter if it's a gastrointestinal issue, no matter if it's asthma, it doesn't matter what it is, the first thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to limit the inflammatory response. So when you look at this person right here, they have 33 different food allergies. We know, all right, this person, their gastrointestinal barrier has become very compromised and very open and very leaky. So just remember this, guys, is that if you look at walnut, are walnuts necessarily bad for you? Not in and of itself, but is a walnut bad for this person? Absolutely. So scallops aren't bad unless you have an allergy to them, okay? Now we're not talking about this IgE, anaphylactic type reaction. We'll see those occasionally, but what we're really talking about is an IgG reaction. That IgG reaction, which is a delayed hypersensitivity reaction, which can really cause a reaction if it's a +4 in a couple hours. If it's a +1, it can be several days, which actually the ones that are the +1 can tend to be the worst because you never really know when you are exposed to them. So if someone has 33, even if it's healthy food no longer becomes healthy if it is first and foremost inflammatory. Because guys, remember, when you're having an inflammatory response, do you think it's going to affect your blood sugar? Do you think it's going to affect your cortisol levels? Do you think it's going to affect a lot of other things? And so really what we look at when we're looking at food allergies is man, why, you got to stop skinning your knee in order for healing to take place. And in fact, you're talking about weight loss, you will never be able to lose weight if you're chronically inflamed. The body doesn't want to. What it wants first and foremost is for you not to be inflammatory. So that is the first and foremost thing. So guys, this is why when you are having all of this immune system issues, because you have way too much stress, you are constantly putting toxins like glyphosate, like wheat gluten, like taking drugs all the time. Guys, you cannot be healthy and be taking drugs. We're talking about antibiotics, NSAIDs, which a lot of times are the culprits. Different types of pathogens can really tear up the gut, like E. coli. But guys, if you have lost your gallbladder, for example, you are going to have so many different food allergies. Holy cow, because you're never ever going to be breaking down your fats the way that you're supposed to. And so many times a doctor never ever recommends some kind of bile acid replacement when they've gotten their gallbladder out. They just say, you can do whatever you want. So guys, inflammation, even with type 2 diabetes, is the most important thing that you need to consider first and foremost. Okay, so what are some common inflammatory foods? Now, these are things not necessarily would even be a food allergy, but they're going to be inflammatory just in and of itself. So hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated oils, okay? Raise your hand if you've had a hydrogenated oil within the last 60 days, and I guarantee you every single one of you probably has had hydrogenated oil. So this will absolutely damage and inflame the liver, okay? Remember, the liver plays a big role in your blood sugar metabolism. How about monosodium glutamate or yeast extract, MSG? Guys, do you know how many people have yeast allergies on their food allergy? One of the culprits is monosodium glutamate, which is considered yeast extract, or quote unquote natural flavors. And they're on the package. And if you're getting food with a package, then chances are you're eating a lot of damaging food. High fructose corn syrup, massively inflammatory. Okay, it's going to affect the liver. Enriched white sugar, enriched white flour, aspartame, Splenda, Ace K, vegetable oils, artificial colors. Guys, these are just going to be some inflammatory foods, even if they're not showing up as a food allergy. Okay, so these are some other things that you need to avoid, even despite the actual food allergies in and of itself. Now, the second thing that every single person with type 2 diabetes, and this is even true for type 1 diabetes, this would be 100% true, because just because you get to inject insulin if you have type 1 diabetes doesn't mean that it gives you free rein as far as what you should be eating, because type 1 diabetics can become type 1 then type 2 insulin resistant diabetics. And you know what? Type 2 diabetics can also become type 1 diabetics due to pancreatic fatigue. So let me ask you guys a question, because you have to then consider foods that is causing a high insulin response in your body, okay? So you have to ask yourself this question: are you insulin resistant? Now, I will tell you the reason how you know if you're insulin resistant is check your insulin levels. So if your insulin levels are starting to creep up at 10, 11, 12, getting up to 20, 25, I'm seeing it actually as high as without any kind of taking exogenous insulin, I've seen it as high as 52, 53. And if it is, you are massively insulin resistant, and the only next step is to be full-blown diabetic and actually experience type 1 diabetes just due to pancreatic fatigue. So insulin resistance is absolutely huge. And remember, just like we always said, it's an adaptive mechanism of the body there to try to protect you, because if it could take all of those sugar that you're eating into the cells would actually die way earlier. So is this you? Do you suffer from insulin resistance? Well, you always have to measure it against your A1C, but I want you to think of this. Do you experience fatigue? Do you experience constant hunger, inability to lose weight, cravings for sugar, fatigue after meals, migraine, aches and pains, upper abdominal obesity? Then chances are that you already are in this stage of insulin resistance. But here's what happens when you start having insulin resistance. You also are going to have issues with the liver, and those issues with the liver are going to cause problems with estrogen metabolism. You start having some problem with estrogen metabolism, hanging on to your estrogens, estrogen dominance, which is actually 100% of the time going to affect thyroid function, because guys having too much estradiol, birth control is the same thing, will absolutely devastate the thyroid, and there you go, your metabolism then starts to slow down, and then you start putting on more weight, and then the problem just continues to multiply. But this is also true if you guys look at insulin resistance and in things as polycystic ovarian syndrome. We just had a young woman with PCOS. We just measured her insulin levels, and they were through the roof, and she was pre-diabetic and only in her late 20s, okay? So you can see what insulin resistance does, and it affects so many different organ systems as well, okay? Now here's a perfect example. So here's a person that comes in, her serum insulin, or blood insulin, was at 60, okay? Now her leptin levels, you guys know what that is. The leptin levels is basically the hunger hormone, okay? As the hunger hormone continues to go up, it actually is more like this is gonna help you feel full. And so with these people, they become insulin resistant and leptin resistant, which means their leptin levels continue to climb. They don't hear it anymore, and they don't know when to stop eating. So these people are actually just grazers. They eat all the time, and there's no mechanism for that to be able to shut off. So you can see that her glucose is at 108, and you can see her hemoglobin A1C 90-day blood sugar average is, you can see that she is in the insulin resistant stage, okay, or pre-diabetes. Now, if she doesn't change this right here, she will be a type 2 diabetic. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. So this is her new testing that we did. Insulin went from 60 down to 15. Glucose went from 108 down to 94. Her hemoglobin A1C went from 6 down to 5.2. And then you can actually see her leptin levels went from 63.2 down to 34, okay? Now leptin levels will actually go down when you start losing fat, okay? So not a bad new post-test that we did. She still had some work to do, but you can see, guys, this is without any medication whatsoever, okay? So just remember, don't let anyone tell you you're unqualified because the proof is in the results, okay? Now, what did we have to do? Non-inflammatory, and then massively start decreasing her exposure to insulin in order to start resetting those insulin receptors. So what are some of the highest insulin releasing foods? Processed sugar, refined grains, high fructose corn syrup. Some fruit can do that as well. So those are some of the biggest ones. But this is why, guys, when people start having some problems with insulin resistance and some problems with the liver and its ability to be able to convert fat into energy, guys, this is why we take people off of all high fructose corn syrup and including a lot of fruit, because we don't want any more exposure to any kind of fructose. It does nothing to benefit their liver because the vitamins and minerals and water that you can get are obviously, they are clearly available in other forms of food, like it begins with a V and it ends in vegetables, called vegetables, okay? Do you guys know you could live your whole life and not eat a piece of fruit and live a healthy, long life, okay? So the thing is we will take people off of that for the time being, and what determines that? Their testing. Their testing will always determine that, okay? Now let me ask you guys a question, because if you went back about 10 years ago, it always seems like there's always new diets that tend to cycle, and they go through the fad, they go through the cycle. A lot of people become the gurus with it, and then as soon as they become the gurus, and then people then move on to something that they think is going to be bigger and better, okay? Now let me ask you guys a question. So here you got the ketogenic diet. Now, a lot of people will say, if someone's got PCOS, someone's got blood sugar issues, people will say, well, the doctor wanted to put me on a ketogenic diet, okay? And what that is that it's about 65% fats, 25% proteins, and about 10% carbs. So you are literally limiting the amount of sugars that you are consuming. Now, do I have a problem with this? Maybe, but I think there's things that could actually be better. Because really what causes a lot of insulin resistant issues is not necessarily the volume of carbs as much as it's the speed at which the carbs are absorbed that demand a quick insulin response, okay? So ketogenic can be rough on some people. I'll tell you who it will be really rough on are the people who don't have gallbladders. And you have no idea how many people come in and say, I tried keto and I see that they don't have a gallbladder, and I say, you really had a rough go with it, didn't you? And they're like, oh my gosh, how'd you know? Because if you are consuming 65 to 70% fat without a gallbladder, there is no way on God's green earth that without having a storage tank to store the bile, that you will ever be able to break down and emulsify those fats. And in fact, a lot of people will complain, I've never had worse diarrhea than doing ketogenic, because all that fat is going straight through you and it's not broken down, not emulsified, and it's definitely not absorbed, okay? So do I think ketogenic has a benefit? Yes, I think it should be cyclical. I think you should have a gallbladder, and I also think that you should be tested specifically, things like insulin, things like your A1C, but then also know how well your adrenal glands are doing, but then also saying, can you even break down fats and proteins? How are those organs even functioning, okay? So we tend to, when people have problems with type 2 diabetes, we don't go as far as keto, but we say, hey, any kind of food that's got a glycemic index above this, I want you to avoid it. And people do really well, and it's not as strict as keto. Now, what about the zone diet, okay? So, people will say, well, the nutritionist wants to put me on zone. So zone is going to be like 30% protein, 40% carbs, and 30% fats. I actually really do like the zone diet, but not for not for type 2 diabetics. So what would a zone diet in which you are, putting your proteins and your fats and your carbs in a very specific kind of zone here, the best thing who that would benefit the most really would be people who have really reset their insulin receptors, who are doing really well, and there's been a time period where you're seeing that those levels have stabilized as far as their blood sugars, their insulin levels, and things like that. And also, if they are doing what's known as high intensity, short duration exercise. And the reason why is we'll transition people on there. Why? Because we can, and they also should, because in order to really help fuel high intensity exercise, you really do need sugar in order to be able to fuel that. So not all sugar is necessarily terrible, okay? So you do need sugar in order to fuel your exercise. So you do need some sugar, specifically stored in the liver and stored in skeletal muscle, because doing high intensity exercise is a requirement of sugar. You need sugar to be able to do that. So do you need to eat the same way your whole life? No, but it should always be non-inflammatory first and then focused on reducing the insulin response inside the body. Just remember, one of the reasons why your body adapted to this to become insulin resistance had to do with sugar. The chronic overexposure of sugar leading to an insulin response that then downregulates those receptors in order to protect you. So if you cause that, then why can't we understand, or even doctors understand, by doing it opposite, reverse engineering it, why can't that produce a healing response inside of the body? So hopefully, guys, that makes a lot of sense to you. So guys, again, give me your opinion. What do you think about this proposed legislation? I want to know your opinion. And also, what do you think about type 2 diabetes and your nutrition? Does that make sense? And if it does, please share that. I want you guys to share that because, guys, the number of people who have insulin resistance and blood sugar issues in the United States is now about 2/3 of people, okay? Now, we went over nutrition. We went over, are your medications even working? We went over alternatives to that, specifically Gymnema. There's some other things that will do that as well. But what about this? And everyone just had a heart attack about exercise, okay? So we're going to talk about next week type 2 diabetes and your exercise. And I'm going to show you how most people are exercising are actually making their type 2 diabetes and their insulin resistance levels problems, they're making it even worse. And I'm going to show you the type of exercise that can actually exacerbate that. And I'm going to show you what you should be doing instead in order to help with insulin and blood sugar sensitivity. And I'm going to tell you guys is that you literally could take your exercise and take it down from 5 hours a week. And literally, if you're talking about blood sugar and insulin sensitivity, take that down to about 6 to 12 minutes per week, okay? Oh, it's a lot more painful. So we'll talk about this next week. And guys, please share this. Please join me next week. And then I'll probably see you guys either tomorrow or on Wednesday. And we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in current health news. Join me for then. And in the meantime, I hope you guys have an awesome night. Be well. I hope you get a great night's sleep as well. And we will see you guys very soon.